The early morning mist clung to the rugged hills of the Ardennes like a ghostly veil, softening the jagged outlines of trees and rocks, but it could not mask the tension that hung over the small scouting party. December 1944 had turned the dense Belgian forests into a frozen labyrinth of mud, snow, and danger, and for the men of the 2nd Infantry Division, every step was a calculated gamble. Orders were clear: reconnoiter ahead, report enemy positions, and avoid unnecessary exposure. Yet, in the chaos of winter combat, clarity was often the first casualty. Corporal Tommy Hargrove crouched behind a twisted oak, peering through the scope of his bolt-action sniper rifle. A veteran of North Africa and Sicily, Tommy was known among his peers for his unerring eye and his obsession with precision. His reputation was whispered about in mess halls and foxholes alike. If Hargrove says that target is dead, it's already buried in his mind before it hits the ground. What made him different wasn't just skill, it was intuition, a near-mystical ability to read terrain, weather, and human movement like an open book. Today, he had a hunch. A small, bent nail protruded from a splintered stump on a ridge about 510 yards away, and in Tommy's mind, that bent nail was more than a fragment of broken wood, it was a marker. A subtle signpost, a line of sight perfectly aligned with an enemy position he had observed 2 days earlier. He had tested the distance with careful triangulation, factoring in wind, elevation, and the slight sag of the barrel after repeated firing. Every detail screamed to him, this was the shot. Yet, the officers dismissed it. Lieutenant Harold Madsen, a competent but cautious leader, had glanced at the mark through the scope, furrowed his brow, and waved Tommy off. "Corporal, we're not wasting rounds on rumors and bent nails. Keep your head down. The scouts will report first." The words stung more than the cold biting at Tommy's fingers. He had seen countless situations where hesitation cost lives, but arguing with officers was dangerous. It was easier to quietly obey and prepare for the worst. The scouting party moved cautiously, 4 men in a staggered line, their breaths fogging in the icy air, the crunch of their boots muted by layers of fallen leaves and frost. They laughed quietly, trying to mask the fear, but Tommy's eyes never left that ridge. He whispered under his breath calculations of wind speed and bullet drop, each syllable a mantra against uncertainty. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The scouts crested a shallow rise, their silhouettes framed against the gray sky. Tommy adjusted his scope, the bent nail perfectly aligned in his crosshairs. His heartbeat was a drum in his ears, steady, patient, each beat a countdown to inevitability. He exhaled slowly, finger hovering over the trigger. He knew what lay ahead if his warning went unheeded. And then it happened. A muffled crack, almost swallowed by the forest. A flash of movement, too swift for the human eye to follow, and the first scout dropped without a sound. Tommy's mind registered it instantly, 510 yards, the bent nail marker, a single shot, precise, unerring. The other 3 men froze, turning instinctively, eyes wide in horror, but before they could react, another round struck. Then another. 4 men, 4 fatalities, each taken with brutal efficiency, and all at a distance that made it impossible to hear the bullets until they struck. Tommy's rifle felt impossibly heavy in his hands, the satisfaction of precision tempered by the weight of reality. He had warned them, silently, through the only language that mattered: observation, calculation, prediction. Yet his voice had been ignored, and the forest now held the still bodies of those he had watched over like a guardian. Lieutenant Madsen's face was pale as he finally understood. He stumbled backward to the ridge, peering through Tommy's scope, seeing for the first time what the corporal had known all along. A small clearing, barely visible behind a thicket of evergreens, revealed the enemy sniper's nest, a carefully camouflaged position with the barrels of Mausers glinting in the pale light. It was the kind of meticulous placement that only an expert marksman could exploit. The bent nail, a fragment of broken wood almost lost to the elements, had marked the line of sight perfectly. "You saw it," Madsen whispered, his voice trembling, almost inaudible over the cold wind. Tommy didn't respond. There was no need. The proof was there, undeniable, and in that silence lay the grim confirmation of his skill. Hours later, after reinforcements had arrived and the enemy position was neutralized, the forest echoed with the sound of mourning. Tommy walked among the trees, inspecting the bent nail marker, a piece of wood that had decided the fate of men. The snow, now falling more heavily, seemed almost to mourn with him, each flake a silent witness. He knelt, brushing his gloved hand over the frost-covered ground where the scouts had fallen. He murmured a quiet apology, not for the shots he had taken, but for the voices that had been silenced before they could hear his warning. The story of the bent nail spread quickly through the division. Soldiers whispered about it in bunkers and around ration fires, half in awe, half in fear. Some called it luck, some called it uncanny skill. Tommy, however, knew the truth. There was no luck in war, only observation, preparation, and courage to act decisively. Later, in a temporary command post, Madsen summoned him. The lieutenant's expression was conflicted, a mixture of respect, guilt, and lingering disbelief. "Corporal Hargrove," he said slowly, I underestimated you. That marker, it saved some of us from walking into the same trap. I can't apologize enough for ignoring your instincts." Tommy nodded, silent, letting the weight of the words settle between them. Apologies were cold comfort for the lives lost, but recognition mattered, and in war, acknowledgement was often the first step toward healing. As winter deepened, Tommy continued his duties, though the memory of the 4 scouts haunted him. Every shot he took, every observation he recorded, carried the invisible burden of responsibility. Yet, there was also clarity. Skill and caution, properly applied, could tilt the balance between life and death. The bent nail, simple and unassuming, became a symbol, a lesson in humility, respect, and the unforgiving precision of war. Years later, when veterans recounted the Battle of the Ardennes, the story of the bent nail range marker endured. It was retold not just as a tale of deadly accuracy, but as a reminder that even the smallest details, the things easily overlooked, could have monumental consequences. And for those who knew Tommy Hargrove, it was proof of a principle that had guided him through blood and snow: never underestimate what the eyes can see and the mind can calculate, because sometimes survival depends on a nail bent just so. The forest grew silent again, the snow burying footprints and blood alike, but Tommy's lesson remained, etched into memory and legend. A bent nail, a line of sight, a warning ignored, each a fragile pivot on which the fates of men could turn. And though the scouts were gone, their sacrifice had not been in vain. It taught the living to watch, to listen, to trust the instincts of those who saw the war not just as chaos, but as a series of measurable, mortal truths. By the time the Ardennes thawed, the division had moved on, but whispers persisted. A sniper, a bent nail, a shot that changed everything at 510 yards. For Tommy, it was neither pride nor sorrow alone, but a quiet acknowledgement of responsibility, the haunting, indispensable weight of knowing that a single observation, if ignored, could mean the difference between life and death. And in the cold, winter woods, the bent nail remained, a silent sentinel of precision, patience, and the unforgiving mathematics of war.